Alright guys, so we are in for push. This is a kind of session you've not seen in the longest, so I thought I'd cover it. And first movement of the session today, we've got a lateral raise machine. So the benefit of this lateral raise is with the pad, with the seat, there's kind of little ability to kind of use momentum or use other muscle groups. If you don't have access to a piece like this, you can simply use like a bench if you're doing like a cuff lateral raise. You can do like a chest supported dumbbell lateral raise if you find you've struggled to stay accurate and keep it on the side of your delt. And then always again, when you're training your side delt, cue out, not up. It'll give you less trap involvement. It's okay, obviously, getting a bit of trap out of it. It's normal, you're going to use your traps, but we just don't want it to be what you could class as the main mover. So 2 sets here before moving on to the shoulder press. So we're on to the shoulder press next, and here I like to opt for a neutral grip. That's typically when your grip's a bit more neutral, you can get a bit more range, whereas you can only get so far down when you've got this quite compromised grip with your elbows out for some people anyway. And here, something to make sure you're doing when you're setting up the shoulder press, don't put the seat all the way down unless you need to. Look how much range of motion I'm missing out on here. I'm missing out on so much depth, and that's arguably where the stimulative part of the rep is. So put your seat as high as you basically can while still being able to just grip the handles, write it down, keep note of it so it's the same week on week and you get the most out of your shoulder pressing. And we're now moving on to the gym Leco flat press, which is a good fit for second in the session, or third in the session, I could say. It's a bit heavier in this stretch, so doing a movement that's going to be a bit more kind of heavily lengthened or heavily loaded in the lengthening position in the stretch. It's going to be a bit safer in my opinion. And also at the lockout, you're mostly going to be using triceps, so it's ideal it dropped off. You get lighter here as it goes to train the chest. And whenever you're doing a press, something to make sure you're being mindful of is keep that sternum angle still. So a lot of times I see people, as they lock out, their chest will dump forward or collapse. Always cue chest up, keep that chest position the exact same, because if that position is changing, you're kind of offloading certain fibers of the chest. So keep that nice and static here, and cue driving elbows in, as that's really your pick. So after performing the shoulder press, which will bias more shoulders, upper pec, and doing the flat press, it will bias more mid pec. He's moved on to the dip, which will be a bit more of a lower pec and tricep and front delt dominant exercise. And I think I love dips for triceps. I think they're great and they're just fun as well. And if you don't have access to a dip machine, just in a bodyweight dip, adding weight when you get strong enough to is absolutely great. And when you're doing a dip, first of all, the reason I'm sitting backwards on this machine is the path's quite weird if I sit the other direction. It starts travelling kind of forward, which is just feels a bit foreign. So I like sitting on another direction, using a seatbelt to create stability. And when you're doing a dip, it's okay to have like a bit of shoulder elevation, then a shoulder depression. In other words, your shoulders move up and down, because you'll actually lengthen the pec more and then shorten the pec more through that bit more movement there. So don't be afraid to allow a bit of movement in the shoulders when you're doing a dip. Something also to note when you're doing like a flat press is if the machine travels down, it'll work a bit more lower pec. If the machine travels up, it'll hit a bit more upper pec. So based on that, you can then maybe change, or that can influence your exercise selection throughout the rest of the week or the rest of your training split. For example, you might want to follow that up if it goes down with like an incline press, or you might want to do a different style of pressing at other session that doesn't go in the exact same path. So next up we've got a dumbbell fly supersetted with a tricep extension, and I like supersetting them just for time efficiency. No other magical reason than that, just keeps the flow of the session going nicely as well. And with the dumbbell fly, I'm a bit less focused on getting an extra rep each week, getting an extra bit of load next week, because the progressive runway of it's quite small, meaning you're not going to be lifting more weight every single time. And what you can do is you can get caught up progressing, like the logbook, beating the logbook, get an extra rep, that you forget the goal is to improve the internal stimulus, and the internal stimulus ends up slipping, meaning the quality work's better, meaning the progress is better. So yes, try and beat last time, but beat last time, don't cheat yourself and change form to get a progression from the previous week. And something we want to consider when trying to bring up weak body parts like my triceps is making sure exercise selection is joint friendly. So if you're doing an absolute ton of work and you're picking movements that aren't friendly on your joints, you're performing your movements in a way that's not friendly in your joints, rushing your work basically, then you're going to run into issues. In this case, elbow issues, if obviously I'm referring to the triceps, and that's going to be the limiting factor in your ability to bring up that weak body part. You can't progress well if you're injured, so make sure you remain accurate. Pick exercises you get on with that you know are comfortable on your joints. So next up, we've got an overhead extension, and when I do this, what I like to do is I actually brace my shoulder against the cable pulley. What that basically does is it gives me a bit more stability. You can argue you're already pretty stable, but maybe increases it further. And also it gives you a standardized, or in other words, a predictable setup that you can replicate weekly. So you're not missing reps due to the fact that you set up poorly for the movement. And you might say it's overcomplicating it, but I don't want to get to the stage next time and still have weak body parts in the same areas due to a lack of attention to detail. So yes, it's not needed, but if I'm going for the effort, you know what I mean, put them all into the sets, why not make the highest quality out of them?
Level 2. Thì họ sẽ suy nghĩ sự ý bạn để cho nên được biểu
And something to comment on as well is, see, whenever you're doing any sort of overhead work, if it's single arm, dual arm, you'll work more of the long head of your tricep, which could be, maybe you could be beneficial because you don't really work that a lot when you're doing any sort of pressing, just due to the nature of the muscle grip. And as a result, you might have gaps in your physique if you don't have an overhead variation in. So if you are going to do a tricep isolation movement, make sure you've got an overhead variation in your program for that reason. And also, just for your movements as a whole, look out for having redundancy in your program, meaning if your push day looks like flat bench press, flat dumbbell press, flat chest press, flat chest fly, then maybe dumbbell flat chest fly. You're doing the same thing, just on a different bit of kit. So have a bit of variation there. Make sure you're pressing in different planes, or have your up arm in a different position to simplify things, just so you're not doing the same thing. So next up, we have a rope cable crunch. And when we think about the roll of your abs, it's to basically flex and extend the spine, which is a fancy way of saying arch and then bend your back. So make sure, see when you're doing it, if your spine's staying the same, you're not actually taking your core for a large range. So make sure you're seeing movement in it and getting as much round and arch in your back as you can. And we've got this superset with a plank, which is basically will work your TVA, transverse abdominis, and it helps with your ability to keep your midsection tight and perform vacuums effectively, which will obviously influence how well I do on a bodybuilding stage. So if this isn't in the camera shot, probably crock it out. If it is, enjoy me doing a plank for a minute. So that's a wrap of today's session. Hope you've enjoyed, guys. What you'll see is I've finished with like a weighted dip, or not a weighted dip stretch, just a bodyweight dip stretch. What that basically does is it allows me to, one, work on my flexibility, two, passive stretching shown to promote muscle growth, and also free injury prevention. If at the end of the session, when my chest is full of blood, it's nice and safe, I can get that deep stretch. I know I'm not going to get injured doing a good stretch on a certain piece of kit if the weight's not that heavy in comparison to my own body weight. And what I mean by that is most injuries happen because the load basically exceeds tissue tolerance, what our body can tolerate. So if I'm used to getting that deep stretch under load, then I'm going to be safe going into my subsequent movements to the session and basically stay pain free, stay injury free. So give it a try. I'll hold that for around a minute and try and progress it up over time.